Hey there, babe. Decided to shoot something just specifically for those people who decide to follow me on YouTube. And I have been asked a lot on TikTok about my childhood, and it's so hard for me to talk about that and condense it into any short segment. So what I had said was that I would choose a specific memory and talk about it. And know that this will be very hard for me to do because a lot of these things that I have suppressed. That's great. That was my coping mechanism whenever I was younger, but it's hard for me to dig those things up. That is part of the therapy that I'm doing now. Bear with me. One of the specific things that I can remember where I distinctly was made apparent that I was not good enough was in one of the fights between my mother and my father. So my mother always done something, spent too much money, bought too much drugs, we couldn't pay bills, we couldn't pay electricity, water, etc. So there was always a fight. It was usually around money or drugs. And my father was very physically abusive to my mother. My mother did have lupus, was considered disabled, but so did my father. My father was considered disabled, has no thumbs. He lost them in an oil field accident. So I grew up living on the disability situation. But I would watch him physically abuse my mother to the point where she was unconscious. And I can just remember wishing that I could do something. And he would cut the phone lines. So there was no calling the police. There was no reaching out for help. And I just remember being so hopeless. And one time, I decided I was going to go to the neighbors. And I was going to call the police. And he realized what I was doing. And now granted, we lived in the middle of nowhere. The neighbor's house was about 10 acres away. So I was running down the road with a bag that I had packed because, we were leaving. We weren't going to come back to this. Or that's what happened every time there was a fight. And so I was slow to run. And I was having a very difficult time running. And I can just remember feeling scared to death. And it wasn't long I hear gunshots. And I thought, surely he's not shooting at me. And then the next thing you know, there's bullets hitting the concrete in the pavement. And that was a very tough pill to swallow, that him not getting in trouble was worth putting a bullet in me for. He could have just injured me, but he very easily could have killed me. I was probably about 9 whenever all of this happened. And there's very, very many more stories like this, but needless to say, I did not get all the way to the neighbor's house. I was afraid. And so I turned around and I came home. And I hate telling these stories and then not having anything to go off of. I'm always trying to find the teaching moment and things, but know that these types of things, they don't define who I am. And I talk about them so that you guys can relate to them, but they don't define who I am. Now, they very much have a very big impact on the person that I am today. But I need you to know you're not defined by your trauma. You're not defined by a diagnosis of PTSD or anxiety or depression or bipolar or any of those things. Those things don't define you. You have to make sure that you learn what you can from that trauma. And what I learned when I was a child was that I was not good enough. I wasn't worthy enough of my own father's love to not shoot at me while running down the road. And as an adult, I grew into learning that I still wasn't good enough, or I wasn't worthy enough to anybody who came into my life, regardless of whether they showed me that or not. And I have done a very good job so far trying to rewrite my script and no longer believing that about myself.